What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Frank Zawrazky of the Hockey News, coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about all of the latest and greatest news from around the NHL in bite-sized portion. Playoffs are officially underway, so we've got lots to talk about today. But before we do, want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now, get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys. Well, we're going to kick it off with game two between the Ottawa Senators and the Carolina Hurricanes. And what a game it was. What a finish it was. Jordan Martinook ended up being the hero, of course, in double overtime. It was a wild finish, like I said, between the Canes and the Sens. Martinook was denied on the penalty shot in the first overtime period after a goal by Mark Jankowski ended up being overturned due to an offside review. Of course, he later got his redemption in the second overtime period, scored the game winner. So despite the loss for Ottawa, Linus Ullmark as well looked really solid. He put together a really strong 43 save performance, made a ton of big saves to keep Ottawa in that game for as long as they were. So Mike, obviously, this was an emotionally, physically draining game ending in Carolina and probably a much later game ending than they were initially anticipating. So now that Carolina's taken a 2-0 seriously, do you think the Senators are going to have enough in the tank to crawl back into this thing as it shifts back to Ottawa for games 3 and 4?
I think the Sens are in deep trouble, not only because they're down 2-0, but because they're shorthanded on the blue line. You know, Thomas Chabot came back from an arm injury and he played. He played in both games, but they've lost Tyler Klevin and they've lost Artem Zub, so they're really taxing, who is left on the blue line. Now I have to say, Carolina. They really deviated from what I expected them to do. Instead of going with Brandon Bussey, they went with Freddie Anderson, as is want for Rod Brindamore. He always seems to go to Freddie Anderson. I think 5 years after Freddie retires, he's still going to go to Freddie Anderson. And it almost cost them, because the second goal was a really bad between the legs shot, 5-hole shot, and he played well the rest of the game, but I don't know how long they can really survive with Freddie Anderson as their number one goaltender. But Ottawa is severely wounded, and now going back 2-0 back to Ottawa. I mean, right now Carolina just has to hope that they have a split in Ottawa to go back and finish the series in 5 games.
Yeah, I mean, Frank, this is a series that, or a hole now that Ottawa has definitely got to climb out of. Do you think that they have enough in the tank to actually get it done? Or do you think, like Mike said, do you think that maybe they might start to expose some of the chinks in Carolina's armor here?
It's really going to depend on what the offense does, Emma. There were so many opportunities for players to step up and make the appropriate offensive plays. I would like to see more from Tim Stützle. I'd like to see him capitalize on some of the opportunities. He had at least 5 or 6 opportunities to put the puck in the back of the net last night and was snake bitten on all of them. At a certain point, you have to elevate your game. This is not week 1 regular season against an out-of-town opponent like San Jose. You're in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and you need to elevate your game. I don't blame Linus Ullmark. I think the defense can hold itself together. It's a question of the timetable for the players that are banged up. But I'd like to see the offense do a little bit more. Was looking to see maybe Claude Giroux. I didn't notice him a lot in overtime 1 or 2 for that matter. So I'd like to see the offense, Stützle and Giroux, kind of take the next step if Ottawa is going to climb out of that. And Augello made a really good point about Carolina. If I'm Ottawa, I am crashing the front of the net. I'm going to have guys watching Milan Lucic's tape before games coming up, because you need to go to the front of the net. I'm not suggesting you run a goaltender, but you need to be in front of the net. There were so many just one and done chances for the Ottawa Senators last night. And you need to sustain that pressure, take away Freddie Anderson's eyes, take away Brandon Bussy's eyes. I agree with Augello. I'm very surprised they did not start Brandon Bussy in this game, given the way he's been playing down the stretch. But that's another discussion. The point for the Ottawa Senators is they need to embrace that greasier, gritty style in the postseason. They're not going to win on skill alone because they don't have the skill of Carolina, for that matter, in terms of the defense and the forward together. So you got to play a scrappier style. I look for the offense and their star players in Ottawa to do more to try and get them out of this hole.
Well, we've talked already about goaltending and the importance and the impact it's had early in these playoffs with names like Freddie Anderson, Linus Ullmark playing big roles in those games, and goaltending played a big performance, a big part in game 2 between the Philadelphia Flyers and the Pittsburgh Penguins. A little surprising, I think. The Flyers have managed to take a 2-0 lead over Pittsburgh after Dan Vladar put together a 27 save shutout of the Penguins in game 2. So Porter Martone, of course, obviously is the bigger story here for Philadelphia. He's just ridiculous. He's continued his offensive hot streak in his very short time since joining the Flyers. He picked up a goal. He now has 12 points in 11 games between the regular season and the playoffs with Philadelphia. So Mike, do you think that the young stars for the Flyers, like Martone, like Trevor Zegras, do you think that they're proving to be a little bit too much for Pittsburgh to handle? Because we talked about this series last week as essentially boiling down to experience versus youth, and what was going to win out here. And do you think that's what's happening, or do you see Pittsburgh mounting a comeback here?
I mean, anything's possible with a team that has Sidney Crosby and Malkin and the pedigree that they have. But if you look at what's happened in the first 2 games of the series, other than Martone, the star of the series has been Philadelphia's ability to shut down the Penguins. They have suffocated them in 2 games. And Vladar has played very well, but they're playing a Rick Tocchet stingy defense against a team that he knows very well because he was an assistant coach in Pittsburgh. And they're getting great performances out of Martone has just been a revelation since he joined them, but they're getting goals from Garnet Hathaway and Luke Glendening. So right now everything is going right for the Flyers, and really the rest of their team, the guys like Konechny and Tyson Forster and Owen Tippett, really haven't started to get going. So I think it's, right now it looks great for Philadelphia going back home up 2-0, but this is Pittsburgh and this is Crosby, and these are guys who, if you think, they're done, they're going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, I'm curious, Frank, because you mentioned this when talking about Ottawa and Carolina, that you need to see that extra kind of level of grit in the playoffs, and that skill alone is not going to carry you. So do you see, like Mike said, potentially Pittsburgh mounting a comeback here? Because this is a team that is never going to say die.
I think with the goaltending in Pittsburgh, I think, you're going to have some issues. And, Garnet Hathaway scoring, Garnet Hathaway's a fabulous player, has been in the National Hockey League for a number of years. He's not a primary goal scorer. That's not his first-hand job. His first-hand job is to be a grinder, get under the opponent's skin, and rim pucks around and create opportunities. If he's putting pucks in the back of the net, Pittsburgh's got bigger problems than offense. They've got problems between the pipes, for that matter. And I do want to highlight Trevor Zegras in this series. There were a lot of questions this season. How would his defensive play be? Some people have said, he was one of the worst defensive centers in hockey at the national level. And I don't know what Rick Tocchet said to him, but he's really peeling the onion on Trevor Zegras, especially in this series. Do I see Pittsburgh mounting a comeback? No. I think Philadelphia wins in 5 games, and it's going to be a decisive victory for the guys in orange and black. I really like what Rick Tocchet is doing, allowing these depth pieces, because like Augello mentioned, some of the star players, like a Tippett, have not really taken off. And I use that term loosely. They're not on fire like Martone. If these guys can get hot down the stretch in the playoffs, Philadelphia can be really, really scary. And having someone like Dan Vladar, who may not quote unquote have the typical resume of a playoff goaltender, but he's been around the block. He's been in Boston. He's been in Calgary. He knows how these things work. And I think his time in Calgary, quite honestly, prepared him for Philadelphia, because Calgary was more of a defensive style team. They had a few really good stars on that roster, but there wasn't a lot of depth. Now you're coming to Philadelphia where you've got guys like Hathaway. You've got 4 lines you can roll together. This plays to Vladar's strengths, and he can take some weight off his shoulders.
Well, that is a series that really, at this point, even though we're down 2-0 or Philadelphia is up 2-0, that you could really kind of maybe see this going either way, like Mike said, just with the playoff pedigree that's in Pittsburgh. Another series heading out to the West now that I think is one that a lot of people have expected to be a very close one, despite the result of game 1, is Minnesota and Dallas. So Dallas evened up the series against Minnesota. They had a 4-2 win in game 2. That was a little more typical of the kind of the level of competition we expected here, rather than the sort of blowout loss they had to Minnesota in game 1. Wyatt Johnston scored twice. Jason Robertson picked up his first goal of the series. But again, goaltending, notably, Jake Oettinger made 28 saves. He gave up just 2 goals after allowing 6 in game 1. So of course, this is sort of the bugaboo that has followed Jake Oettinger around ever since last season, when there was the questions about his goaltending with Pete DeBoer and his comments after the end of the season. And, there was question as well after he gave up 6 goals in game 1. Are they going to make a change and go with Casey DeSmith in game 2? And they didn't. So, Mike, when you look at this now, since that proved to be the right choice, sticking with Oettinger in game 2, do you think that his performance is going to be what dictates whether or not the Stars can get past the Wild and actually make a deep playoff run this year?
I think it's going to be a big part, but he can't do it by himself. And it was the game 1, Dallas was comatose. I mean, I thought that this would be a really tight series, and I predicted it to go 7 games. But if Dallas played like that, it was going to be a 4-game sweep on the part of the Wild. And, the Wild were still in this game. I mean, Brock Faber single-handedly kept him in the game with a couple goals, but I thought Oettinger was the Oettinger that I expect to see. And, remember, his problems have occurred against one team in the conference finals. So until that point, he's been a pretty solid playoff performer. That's why, like, when Team USA was playing at the Olympics, it was head-scratching that they played Jeremy Swayman instead of Oettinger the one time they didn't play Connor Hellebuyck. So I think this is going the full 7. And Jesper Wallstedt in there for Minnesota was a little bit of a surprise, because I thought they were going to go with Gustafsson. So a lot of surprises around the league in terms of goaltenders. And this one is going to go the distance, I think.
Yeah, Frank, do we chalk that game 1 performance from Dallas up to just an anomaly, and this is a little bit more of what we're going to see from these two teams, and how much do you think that the goaltending is really going to factor in here?
There's a saying, it's the exception, not the rule. And that's exactly what it was for Jake Oettinger. Jake Oettinger is a bona fide playoff goaltender. And Augello hit the nail on the head. It happened against one team in the conference finals. We don't need to be making broad, sweeping generalizations about a player when it's comparing apples and oranges. I think the scoring, it's going to be a high-flying offensive series between both of these teams. So offensive depth is going to be the key between these two sides. Goaltending will be a part of it, because you obviously need to keep the puck out of the net, but the offensive depth will be important. I'm going to go back to our previous segment on Philadelphia. If you can get guys similar to Garnet Hathaway, like a Nick or Marcus Foligno, activated for Minnesota will win. If Dallas can activate their bottom 6 more effectively, they'll win. That's really the way I see this series going. Everybody knows what to expect from Kirill Kaprizov, Wyatt Johnston, those superstar players. We all know what to expect, but we don't know what we're going to get from the bottom 6. That's the X factor. The team with the better depth forwards will win this series.
And the thing that stinks, Emma, is one of these teams is going to lose in the first round. And thank you, Gary Bettman, for your stupid playoff format.
Well, on that note, I want to go back to something that Frank said about, how depth scoring is going to decide this series, because we saw a little bit of that in game one between Edmonton and Anaheim. Edmonton opened up their series. They won in a comeback fashion, 4-3 over the Ducks. But I think what is most notable about the win is that one Connor McDavid held off the score sheet entirely. The Oilers' depth really carried the day. Jason Dickinson and Kasperi Kapanen, they each scored twice. Again, McDavid did not factor there. Connor Ingram made his Stanley Cup playoff debut with Edmonton between the pipes. He had previous experience years ago playing in the first round of the playoffs for Nashville against Colorado. That series was over pretty quickly, though. So I think now that he's getting his feet wet with Edmonton in the playoffs, he made 25 saves and looked like he got more comfortable as the game went on. So, I mean, it's only one game, but Mike, do you see any strengths that this Oilers team may have over previous iterations of this team that would suggest that they might finally be able to get over the hump and win it all this season?
First, that guy 97, he's a bum. Trade him. I mean, if he doesn't show up. I think the one advantage that Edmonton has is their vast experience over the last few years. I mean, going to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final, going through, 4 rounds. The players that are on that roster, that's valuable. And I think that that's sort of what happened last night against an inexperienced Anaheim team. Anaheim came back from a 2-0 deficit, scored 3 goals in the second period. And as Anaheim has done repeatedly this year, they can't hold on to a lead. I mean, in a couple years, that young group will learn how to carry a hold on to a 1 or 2 goal lead in the third period, and they'll be dangerous. But right now, they're getting their comeuppance from more experienced teams like Edmonton. And if Edmonton can win games without McDavid scoring, then they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Well, it might be a little bit of kind of what we talked about with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Frank. I mean, the experience versus youth and, specifically playoff experience here. And you're going to see teams like Anaheim are still going to be a little rough around the edges, like Mike was saying. But do you think that experience from this Oilers team will ultimately win the day here?
I do, Emma. And when you're looking at this, Stan Bowman overpaid, but Jason Dickinson and Connor Murphy have been invaluable for Edmonton. They've shored up the defensive side of the Oilers. Part of the problem that Edmonton had the past few years against Florida is they weren't that well situated defensively, especially from the forward group. You've got Jason Dickinson, who really shouldered a lot of weight in Chicago, was able to take over some of that primary scoring in Chicago, where they're still bringing prospects up. But now he's transitioned into a different role. He's taken some of the weight off his shoulders. He's free to play a grittier, greasier game while keeping his defensive instincts intact. So I think if you look at this Oilers team versus the past 2 seasons, it's defensive depth in the forward core. That's what will win them the day if they stick to that against Anaheim.
Yeah, we've talked about the Oilers defense quite a bit here on the show, but I think you bring up a good point about the defensive play of the forwards being an impactful piece of that as well. So it'll be interesting to see, if their depth scoring continues to show up as well. And then once you get that guy 97 going, I mean, there's no telling what's going to happen between Edmonton and Anaheim here. So moving away to non-playoff teams now, obviously teams are starting to have their exit interviews and locker cleanouts and whatnot as they head home or to vacation for the summer while everyone else is competing in the postseason. The Winnipeg Jets, obviously disappointing season for them. They were the President's Trophy winners last year, didn't even make the playoffs this year. They did kind of mount a comeback. They came close, but didn't quite make it. Head coach Scott Arniel responded to some something that Connor Hellebuyck had said during his exit meeting, which suggests that the Jets may need to act with some urgency to remain competitive and keep Hellebuyck keep him interested in sticking around, because this is something that we've seen with teams and players like Vancouver and Quinn Hughes. It's like you got to do something to keep them interested in sticking around. And Arneal said, quote, he wants to win a Stanley Cup, as does everyone in that room. So for me, we've got to help him do this. The part about being here or not here, I've never heard anything like that, and that's never come across my desk. It's about winning. It's about getting back to our standards of where we were last year, end quote. So Mike, do you think that the Jets should be concerned about anything that Hellebuyck has said about, wanting to win a Stanley Cup and whether it happens in Winnipeg or somewhere else? And are you confident that they will be able to kind of flush this season and get back to playoff contention next year?
I mean, obviously, after winning the President's Trophy and then losing in the second round last year was a disaster. They had a lot of injuries. Hellebuyck had international success, obviously, with the Olympics, but he obviously wants to win a Stanley Cup, and he did all that he could because he took less to sign in Winnipeg, as did Mark Scheifele. And, the organization has stepped up. They signed Kyle Connor to a big deal. But really, I think depth is an issue, and probably adding one or two more players. They lost Nick Ehlers in free agency. They have to sort of step up, and it's going to be tough for them because honestly, this free agent class stinks, and they probably will have to trade some of their prospects to bring in another player. Hellebuyck has 6 years left in the contract. But he holds the whip hand in a sense. It's like, if I don't think I can win a Stanley Cup in Winnipeg, he's going to say trade me. And similar to the situation with Austin Matthews in Toronto, but Hellebuyck's got 6 years left and Matthews has got 2, so it's slightly different. But I think the pressure is the same in a Canadian market. They have good players. They just need to add a few more. And the Western Conference, as we know, is extremely tough, and they're in the toughest division in the NHL right now.
Yeah, with Hellebuyck, we're talking about a Vezina and Hart Trophy caliber player here. It's not often that you see where the goaltender is unequivocally the most valuable player on his team, but we've seen that time and time again with Connor Hellebuyck in Winnipeg. So, Frank, what do you foresee happening here? Do you think that Winnipeg gets it together, gets back on track for next year? And how long do you think the leash is going to be before Hellebuyck does potentially decide, well, I want to go win a cup, even if it's not here?
I can't read Connor Hellebuyck's mind, but you got to imagine it's within the next 2 to 3 years that leash gets shorter. And the reason I say that is Winnipeg's going to have a top 10 pick in the NHL draft based on the lottery odds. Now, who they take with that pick could very well sink or swim Connor Hellebuyck's chances in Winnipeg. And I'm not going to get into the whole draft and who I think they should take, but I will say it would behoove them to take a defenseman if you're Winnipeg. It would behoove them to get some extra protection for Connor Hellebuyck. But going back to the Jets as a whole, I think they need to start acting with a little bit more urgency. They got to start making some moves, package guys up. If something's not working, get rid of it. The time for emotion is over. You won the President's Trophy last year, and you were supposed to build on it. Instead, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And that's what happened between last season and this season. So I expect maybe the free agent class isn't the best, like Augello said, but I'd expect them maybe to try to do like a sign and trade style deal. Maybe, somebody, they sign somebody, flip them to another team for an asset. That very well could be done. And the point that Hellebuyck made that concerns me the most is he said something to the effect of, Winnipeg's my home. I love it here, but the rest of the league doesn't. Something to that effect. And I'm paraphrasing here. And that's very telling because, he's, like Augello said, he's putting everything on the line. He's proven he's a winner. He proved he's a winner with regard to a gold medal in the Olympics. And, that's very telling. So there were a lot of reports like, oh, is Connor Hellebuyck a playoff goalie? we saw him on a bigger stage than the Stanley Cup. At least in my opinion, the Olympics are a bigger stage because it's more global than North American Center. So I'd be interested to see what they do at the free agent class this year. I'd be interested to see who they draft. You know, if I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff, I'd kill for Albert Smits right now. He's an NHL ready defenseman. He is somebody you can throw in the lineup right now. I would take him over Verhoff if you're Winnipeg, because Verhoff needs a few years to develop at North Dakota. So that just goes to show you that the urgency and the seat is heating up a little bit in Winnipeg.
I'm almost surprised, Emma, that Hellebuyck didn't say there are no palm trees in Winnipeg. So, you know, he could go down that road. I'll just say this. Frank brought up a good point with their first round pick. If they're looking to make a move in a window of 2 to 3 years, then you trade that first round pick to get a player who's under cost control, and you add to that group, because honestly, great, a Smits or somebody that you draft in the upper half of the first round is going to be likely a good player in 2 or 3 years, but you may need a goaltender at that point, and you're probably going to have to make that move and be bold if you hope to win a Stanley Cup in Winnipeg.
Yeah, maybe could be seeing some moving and shaking at the top of the draft order here this year. So something to keep an eye on for sure with the Winnipeg Jets. Looking at some of the other, obviously the non-playoff teams that have seen their seasons come to an end, also some general managers have seen their tenures in their respective jobs come to an end. There are lots of, there are different teams that have been interviewing GMs. We look at New Jersey; they've already hired a new GM, but those talks and those situations are still very much ongoing. So, of course, the latest news is that Vancouver fired their GM, Patrick Allvin, last week. There's now more teams on the market now looking for a new GM. They join Toronto, Nashville, and we have just gotten word that Vancouver has been granted permission to talk to Kevyn Adams. So a guy that, Mike, you might be familiar with here and might have some insight for us. But, with all these rumored candidates for all three of these organizations, Vancouver, Toronto, and Nashville, who is someone that you see filling in a role on any of these teams, and why do you think they would be a good fit?
Well, just quickly on Adams, obviously his experience, 5 years in Buffalo, drafting relatively high in the draft, and we know that Vancouver is part of a rebuilding team. The talent recognition and the necessity to hit on these high first round picks, that might be why they're looking at him. I'm sure they're going to cast a wide net. In terms of the three teams that you mentioned, obviously Toronto is one I've covered for a number of years. They seem to be, I know Elliot Friedman reported a list of like about 10 people that they have spoken to, anywhere from Mike Gillis to John Chaika, and then a number of assistant GMs. The name that sort of piqued my curiosity was Scott White, the assistant GM of the Dallas Stars. He's basically served at the right hand of Jim Nill for about over a decade. He's very experienced in terms of being a coach at the ECHL and AHL or NCAA level, and an AHL general manager, negotiated contracts, all these things that you need from a boss. And with the Leafs, Mark Leach, who's formerly part of the Dallas Stars scouting staff, is the head of amateur scouting with the Leafs. So there would be some sort of continuity there if they brought White in. I mean, Gillis seems to be the leading candidate, but they were throwing out Doug Armstrong for months, and that didn't come to fruition. So if I was going to throw a dart at the board, I'll say Scott White.
Frank, what do you think, looking at these openings and the candidates to fill them? Any that stick out to you immediately as strong fits?
Yes, Kevyn Adams. And in my opinion, Kevyn Adams is the reason the Buffalo Sabres are where they're at. Kevyn Adams built this entire roster. Do I think he did it in a quick fashion? No. But Kevyn Adams is the true mastermind of the Buffalo Sabres and their resurgence. Jarmo Kekalainen is a fabulous general manager. But the way I see this playing out in Buffalo is very similar to what happened in Chicago at the start of their dynasty. Dale Talon built the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks before Stan Bowman took over. Talon's contributions often are not recognized. And I think Kevyn Adams would be a perfect fit in Vancouver. he's got the ability and has proven with his drafting that he can hit on these high picks. Kevin Adams would be my pick in Vancouver. I don't think he'd work in Toronto because they need to win now and they don't have as many draft picks. But I would say Kevin Adams would be my pick. I think Kekalainen, again, nothing away from Jarmo Kekalainen. He's a fabulous general manager, and he didn't build the Buffalo Sabres. That was Kevin Adams. And we need to recognize that the reason Buffalo is where they are is because of Kevin Adams, not Jarmo Kekalainen.
All right. Well, that's a take that I'm sure a lot of people in Buffalo may tend to disagree with for various reasons, but certainly see the point that you're making there, Frank, about, the Sabres and their very long road to get to where they are right now. And teams are not built overnight, like you said. So will be interesting to see what happens. Like I said, we've got Vancouver, Toronto, Nashville, all looking for new general managers. So should start to see some movement there, I would think, in the coming weeks. Want to wrap up today talking about Macklin Celebrini in San Jose. So in his exit interview for the season, he said that when it comes to signing an extension with the Sharks, he's, quote, open to every possibility, and he wants to commit to the team. So he's got 1 year remaining on his 3-year deal. It's just over $3 million on his entry-level contract he signed after being drafted first overall in 2024. So he's eligible to become a restricted free agent after next season, but he can, of course, sign an extension anytime after July 1st of this year. So, Mike, what do you think that Celebrini's next contract is going to look like? I think we can all safely assume that it's going to be with the San Jose Sharks, but do you think it's possible that he becomes potentially the highest paid player in the NHL on his next deal?
I'm not sure about that, simply because even though he's had 2 phenomenal years and he's a great young player, but it's a situation where, and it's unfortunate for the Sharks, that they can only sign him after July 1st, and the new CBA allows only for a 7-year extension rather than an 8-year extension. But I don't think Celebrini and his representatives are going to take 8 years or 7 years. I think they're going to follow the Austin Matthews situation where he's going to take a shorter term deal because he wants to take advantage of the salary cap going up, which is going to continue to skyrocket. So he might sign a 3-year deal or a 5-year deal. And if he signed the shorter the deal, the less the money, but it's still going to be, I would say, easily over $12 million. And, maybe with AAV for about 5 seconds, it'll be the highest in the league, but it won't be highest for long.
Frank, what do you think?
I concur with Augello on this one. It's smart business. I'd say maybe 5 years, kind of bridge deal, see where he's at, longer term bridge deal to kind of wait for the cap to catch up, because keep in mind, San Jose has other guys that they need to lock up at certain points. They're rapidly ascending. They have a really good problem to have, Emma. They've got too much young talent, and they don't know what to do with it right now. So I would expect Celebrini to take a more team-friendly deal in this sort of bridge deal as the Sharks swim to the surface of the NHL standings, hopefully next season and beyond. Because when San Jose is good and the Shark Tank is buzzing, hockey is just objectively better. And, I think Celebrini, having seen the kind of character he displayed at Boston he's the kid that is willing to do whatever it takes for his team. Watching him in Chicago, seeing him at Boston U, it wouldn't shock me if he takes a team-friendly deal for 5 years.
Sharks swimming to the surface. I see what you did there. Of course, if you want to read any more about the ongoing Stanley Cup playoffs or any of the GM searches, any of the teams, topics, players we've talked about today, of course, head over to Hockey News. It's been the ultimate hockey fix for over 75 years. Now you can get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com, get in on the action. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and listening to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with an all new episode on Thursday. But for now, for Michael Augello and Frank Zawrazky, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.